Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Kieran from Tales from the Basement, and we're going to be painting some Slapchop today, um, which is a unique and kind of new, trendy method of speed painting using contrast paints and dry brushing. I've been seeing it a lot from the YouTube community over the last couple weeks of everybody going the new way and kind of how they improve on it and make it better. And I should have done my research before I started talking, but I believe I'm not even gonna try. It was invented by some YouTuber, or at least the term Slapchop was coined by a YouTuber for this particular method of using contrast paints. So, without further ado, we're actually going to get started. So what makes Slapchop? Like, how does that make it different from just using contrast paint over, say, a gray base tone or whatever, which is the usual thing you want to use contrast paint over? Well, it has to do with the first couple steps. I'll grab some paper towels. What makes Slapchop kind of unique and fast and all that is, instead of doing like a zenithal prime over black, or starting from a white base tone, you're actually going to start with black, and then you're going to dry brush a gray over the entire model. That, well, it depends on what you actually want from this, but for the most part, you're going to dry brush over most of the model with a mid-tone gray to hit all of the raised areas, to get them to pop a little bit, and to keep the shadows black and shadowed. And the intention here is that the way contrast paint works is when you put it over a white base coat or something like that, it settles into the recesses and thins out in the upper areas, and you get a natural, or a contrast paint natural shadow and highlight because of the way contrast paint works. It pools in corners and recesses and that sort of thing, while still keeping paint over the raised surfaces, unlike a wash. So what you're doing is you're actually helping out the contrast paint here by providing more highlights and deeper shadows for the contrast paint to interact with, so that the undertones actually help the highlights pop even further and the shadows be deeper in the end. So initially we're just doing this gray, hitting all the raised areas. Let me actually bring him up closer. Now, because this horse is a nightmare, according to most everybody on Reddit and that sort of thing, is I'm actually keeping most of the coat black, so I'm actually need to be a little careful about my dry brushing, to ensure that it actually stays black, and so I can use an Eshin gray to highlight the coat itself. So I'm just going to keep on going here. A nice gray dry brush over all the raised areas I want them on. You'll notice that I'm even doing the undersides of these, like the cloak, and I'll even be doing the underside of most things on this model. And that's because I'm actually going to come back with a pure white dry brush before we start using the contrast paint, that will really bring the lights to light. And even when you're painting a model, you would Ooh. I almost dropped him. You want to highlight some of the undersides of things because of the way light works. And in this instance, these are going to be all the main and right here. Those are all going to be sources of light, so we're actually going to be highlighting with that in mind that those are sources of light because they're going to be on fire. So we're just going to keep on dry brushing this entire guy. Trying to hit all the raised areas. So, for when I dry brush, typically I have a paper towel next to me to wipe off most of the excess of the dry brushing materials. I've been doing more reading up on the right way to dry brush, which is wiping off your paint onto a non-absorbent surface like chipboard, so that your dry brushes don't look as chalky, dusty. They look clean, and you'd be able to get really smooth transitions with those. But because I'm going to be putting contrast paint over this, I'm not too concerned about the chalkiness or anything like that on these things. I'm just looking for the highlights. That's what I'm looking for. I'm just trying to get the raised edges to a lighter tone so that when I come back with the contrast paint is helped out. Actually doing pretty good right now. And I will even highlight these. I might even base coat these in the flames and such in gray, and then come back and dry brush with white to really help the fact that these are light sources. So, you know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. Okay, grab my base coating brush. Go ahead and base coat these guys. And this, I'm using Dawnstone from Citadel for this. But any medium tone gray. I'm also using a warm tone. Because these are going to be flames. So you want to use something that's a bit warmer versus cold, because it'll also help with the model won't get too desaturated. We're just going to be base coating these guys. Because flames, they're brighter towards the center of the model. I might even be wet blending some white into this to try to get it into the recesses. Make sure to get into those nooks and crannies. And before I actually get started on the coat of the Nightmare, I'm going to be coming back and cleaning up any of these mistakes with some Abaddon Black and go from there. little bit of more Dawnstone on my palette. Let's go ahead and throw some of the Pro Acryl's Titanium White. This is my new favorite white to use. It has the best texture and consistency that I've used of a white. I have issues with Citadel whites because they tend to get grainy or they don't mix very well. There's that. Now I'm going to be wet blending this white in like I had stated earlier. So the center of the flames and such. Just a moment. Okay. Sorry, quick thing to fix. Alright, gotta keep on with this wet blending. Now, I'm not overly concerned with making sure these blends look great right now, because remember, we're going to be putting contrast paint over this, so a lot of our sins won't be seen. Alright, now come on, let my brush get in there. Alright, now we're gonna grab some of this gray and kind of wet blend it. So it's a nice, smooth transition. So, the reason I picked this model to try this out with is because there's a lot of nice raised areas, lots of edges, but also because I love the Headless Horseman. He's been a long time favorite American legend sort of thing. The man looking for his head. I remember the first time I was exposed to this legend was actually a Wishbone. For anyone who was watching movies in like the 90s and early 2000s, Wishbone was a mystery-solving beagle, I think. And they had a Halloween special that was the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. And to be honest, I can't remember a lot about that movie, but I remember being obsessed with it as a kid. just a lot of long time obsession with the Legend of Sleepy Hollow came from that. Alright, so we base coated this stuff, and I had the realization that there's also a few more sources of light on this model. There. For those of you who just saw it, that TIE Fighter totally just committed kamikaze. There's going to be sources of light from the pumpkin head himself. So this mouth area, the eyes, those are all going to be sources of light. And I'm going to say even the eyes of the horse. So I'm going to take some pure white on this. And I'm going to fill those in a little bit. Is the music a little quiet for you folks? Focus. Alright, I'm going to say that these little runes here are also going to be sources of light. So I'm going to very carefully try to fill these in with some titanium white. One more tucked in here. Sorry if I didn't get that on camera. Let's do it on the other side. Alright. I think I'm going to throw a little bit more titanium white on the tail of this guy, just to make it pop a little more. Alright. So, I'm now going to take a new dry brush, because I had to rinse my old one. I'm going to dry brush the sources of light I just did. Just highlight them with some of the white. Just to really push some of these highlights. I'm actually going to come back and also, the closer we get to the face, the lighter it's going to be. So I'm actually going to do a fairly, I'm going to do a white dry brush around the face to push these highlights, to draw attention to what we're painting, to make sure that your eyes have a focal point to go to. And we also want to dry brush the white around where sources of light are going to be hitting. That's definitely something we want to hit. And let's hit this axe blade this side, but we're not going to hit on the other side because I want this to be the focal point. I want how we're viewing it right here at the camera. That's how I want it to appear. That's where I want your eyes to be drawn to. So I'm just going to push that highlight. I'm going to go back to gray and push some of the highlights on other areas up. So I'm seeing that the saddle's looking a little dim. Some of the pants. Some of the smaller details are kind of getting lost in the mix. So. And so like the underside of this cloak kind of got missed. Right here. And then last but not least, we're actually going to dry brush the base because I'm going to be using contrast paints on the base to set it up as well. So, not being super careful, this is definitely not a focal point of the miniature, so it's not too crucial. I'm actually going to take some Eshin Gray and dry brush the coat of this guy. Because I've decided that the way I'm going to keep it black is I'm going to dry brush it with the Eshin Gray. And then come back with a wash to bring it back down, but we still get some highlights and that sort of thing. So we're going to get this entire horse with some of this Eshin Gray. I might not even hit it with a wash, depending on how this goes. So, Slapchop. Right now, we are still in the very beginning stages. I've heard some people go like, oh, well, I did like a Space Marine in 20 minutes. Did you really? I mean, I'm not going to say anything, but also this is like a 32 mil model instead of the normal 25 for Dungeons and Dragons, so it might be taking me a bit longer than, say, a single Space Marine that isn't riding a horse. Oh, looks like I got a little bit of the white from the mane onto it, but that's fine. We're going to go ahead and come back with the wash at that point anyways. Alright, so that's pretty good. On the dry brushing the horse itself. I say as I continue to do it. Wipe off all the excess and then come back again. Alright, I'm going to mix a little bit of the Dawnstone with the Eshin Gray to bring it up just a tad, and we're going to treat this as kind of similar to the pure white on the other parts. Just trying to bring it up a little bit in certain areas. Like mainly sources of light, again. Alright. We go back to the white and Eshin Gray mix. Or white Dawnstone mix, excuse me. I'm gonna flip my paper towel over. Just hit these raised edges. Alright, So I'm going to say that that dry brushing is good to go. So, I rinse my brush. I think the first thing we're going to start with is going to be let's start with the sources of light. We're going to go with Doomfire Magenta as our first contrast paint. Now this is a contrast paint that acts almost more like an ink from what I've used it as, or for what I've used it for. So, maybe a little more careful. It's a single pigment paint, which makes it very unique and extremely vibrant. Regretting using a smaller brush for this right now. But usually I'm like, hey, don't worry about it. If you get it on the paint onto different segments, we're gonna come back and fix this. Well, the entire point of the dry brushing and all that was that we could use contrast paints, and so that the undercoating shows through a little bit. Well, if we put a different color paint over the undercoating we just did, a lot of our work is just pointless, and we'll have to re-base coat that point black, re-dry brush it gray, and all that. So this painting method kind of relies on already having some pretty good brush control. That's something to keep in mind. Switch to my larger brush. Now, when it comes to contrast paints, I actually have a pretty limited palette because I don't typically paint with them, so I don't honestly use or have very many. So I'm going to be pretty limited in what I can do here. Pull to the end. Say I'm really enjoying this magenta color. you can already see in some of these areas that I'm actually getting quite a significant transition from my highlights to like my pure white to my gray, and to set up a very convincing gradient of light source, even from with the undercoat. We're just gonna keep slapping on that contrast paint. And with contrast paint, once you're done applying the paint, you really want to avoid the areas that you just painted with contrast paint until it's completely dry before you do another coat, because it can become too much rapidly. And you can also strip some of the paint you've already worked with. Be very careful. Alright. So, that's the magenta. Oh, I said light sources, so we're actually going to finish doing those. I'm going to do this into the eye sockets. Now that the magenta's done, I think it's good to move on to the cloak, I'm thinking. And I'm going to make the pants probably similar color to the cloak to kind of bring them together. Like I mentioned before, I'm kind of limited on my palette for contrast paints. So I have a ultramarine blue contrast paint that I'm going to be using for the cloak. You can already see on this cloak here that the dry brushing is already making the folds of this cloak pop. Say, I was speed painting an army of miniatures or something to that effect, I might actually use this method. This is where it gets tricky when you're trying not to hit any of the other areas. anything else. Alright, now to flip it upside down and continue the cloak. Okay, I'm gonna check that I'm on the right playlist still. Cool. Alright, we're on the right playlist still. Alright, we're just gonna keep on adding this contrast paint. So we have all the sections of the cloak. And I'm gonna say that's looking pretty good. You can already see on the cloak that those highlights are already really starting to pay off, though on camera the reflections are pretty intense. So we're going to move on to the head. We're going to be using some Griffhound Orange. It's a pretty brown orange, so I'm actually going to add a little bit of this Jakara or Troll Slayer orange to the contrast paint. Just a little bit. Try to bring it up a little bit. There we go. It's a little bit better. So switching to a smaller brush so I can get some of these smaller details. Say I'm not too happy with this orange. Probably gonna come back and actually paint it orange, not using contrast paint. But I'm thinking if I mix that orange with a bit of my brown, that'd actually be a pretty good saddle color. So that's what I'm gonna do. A little bit of the Griffhound orange with some of the Dark Oak Flesh. Contrast paint. Then I'm going to use Dark Oath Flesh on the handle of the axe and his boots. So, let's go ahead and slap this on his saddle. sash. Boots. All right. I'm gonna use some of that same blue for the saddle blanket. That's gonna look pretty good. We're gonna take some more of this brown and do this leather sash or belt sash. Yeah. This mix of the orange, mix in maybe a little bit of this blue. Alright, we mixed in a little bit of the blue into the Griff Orange Brown, or Griff Hound Orange, and the Dark Oath Flesh to create the leathers for his gloves. Some visual differences with the wood of his handle. Alright, we're going to take some Basilicum Gray. I like Basilicum Gray because you can actually do a pretty nice non-metallic metal when you just put it over this dry brushed white. Especially when you come back with a pretty severe highlight. So I'm going to even do some of the touch-ups on this bandolier. Alright. Let's go with... yeah. go with some green for his pantalones. This is a very rich tone. Yeah, we're going to use it on this coat, because why not? Alright. Excellent. Alright. I'm going to take the silicon gray. I'm going to go ahead and hit the pants below to basically make it look like I didn't forget them, to have some tone on them so they don't just look like our dry brushed gray. But pants don't need to be super highlighted. I'm thinking let's do a little bit of touch-ups here. Right about now that I wish I had a tan or white-ish contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the Dark Oath Flesh and Profound Orange mixture, and I'm going to add some white ink. Try to get something a little closer to khaki. And I'm using ink because it has a runny consistency much like contrast does, and it tends to not mess up the contrast paint properties too much. Not sure how I like this. That contrast is very runny in that spot, so I'm going to hold off finishing that little spot up. Sometimes the hardest part about painting these guys is figuring out how I'm going to hold it in order to get a paint in a certain spot. So you can see from the axe, it's actually pretty convincing axe, but we're going to take some titanium white. We're going to edge highlight. Boom. Just gonna... Keep doing some of the trim. Alright, so it seems like a lot of my previous work needs time to dry. I'm not sure how I feel about the Slapchop method. I think if I had a larger palette, I would be a lot happier, but I am very limited in the paint schemes I can go with right now. But in general terms, like, this cloak, I'm very happy with. I would be very happy with that. This green, I'd be very happy with if I had done this over a dry brushed gray. I'm not sure how I feel about the magenta as my flames yet, but it kind of has a otherworldly quality. I think once I dry brush over it with a darker purple, like a screamer pink, and then a black mixed into that to make it to look like the end of a flame. You know how it gets a little black with the smoke and all that. I think once I do that, do a couple touch-ups with some non-contrast paints, I'd be very happy with this paint job. And all in all, I'm kind of liking the Slapchop, but I'm not 100% sold on it as a major scheme. Alright. Just checking on the life of the stream. Let's go ahead and I'm thinking I might mute myself for a moment. Just so I can apply a hair dryer to dry up some of these contrast paint points, and then we can finish this up. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Alright, I think that's good enough for what I got going on. Now, keep in mind, this axe doesn't have any metallic paint on it. It is the basilicum gray with some highlights of white. I'm very happy with how that turned out. It looks pretty metallic to me. So, we're going to come back with this trim. Try actually throwing some paint on there and making it look a little more opaque. Just got paint where I didn't want it, but not to worry, you can siphon paint, contrast paint up, kind of like a wash with a clean brush. If you can see, I'm kind of stippling this on because contrast paint will use capillary action to go where your brush is going, but I want it to pool up in certain spots more than others so I can get heavier pigmentation in some spots, because unlike traditional paint, I have to I have to dabble it on to get better opacity than it is to thin my paints in order to, and then spread it out in order to get nice opacity, nice smoothness. silicone gray because I want to get all these little buttons read more like metal. I'm going to take a little bit of this magenta mixed with a little bit of the titanium white, and I'm just going to back on these eyes here. A little bit of brightness. Then we're going to go ahead and start edge highlighting these flames to try to... Nope. Immediately no. In all honesty, just going to do some slow highlights here and there. Alright, saved that. I'm going to take some of the ultramarine blue and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of game color electric blue. And then I'm going to edge highlight the cloak. Now, game color is a pretty thick paint. So when you mix it with a contrast paint, it's actually going to thin out pretty nicely. Okay. Now we're just going to come in and just take some of the high points of the cloak. Come in, hit the raised edges to really sell this effect. Trying to use the edge of my brush instead of the tip of it because that gives me more control about where the paint is going. not going to bother going to the bottom side of this cloak. I'm going to focus on the top. And then I'm going to come in with some Morghast bone mixed with that lighter khaki color that I had made earlier. There's some edge highlights there. We're not trying to undo the work we've already done. We're more trying to bring attention to it. Clean it up a little bit. Some titanium white. Just we're doing ocular highlights with the white because a nice high contrast point on a kind of indeterminate object gives it a strong feeling of reflectivity, which often equates to being metal. And that's exactly what I'm going for. Anything that I would like to be viewed as metal, I'm giving some nice strong points of highlight so that they look extremely reflective. And that is selling those buttons on the coat as metal extremely well. The basilicum gray plus titanium white dry brushed axe, that is reading as a metal axe extremely well. So I'm going to continue that trend on anything I want to be viewed as metal. So like right here, there's a little button. I'm going to add just a drop. And so you always want the ocular highlights just slightly off from true... How do I say this? Say that you have a source of light. Say that the light in front of me, and you have a fist. You see how it's reflecting very pale, like I have a total hot spot of light right here, but you're going to want the reflect... Okay, I'm doing a terrible job explaining this. You see this bottle? The light source is not in line with this bright spot of reflectivity. It is slightly up because that is the way the radius is redirecting the light. It's how it's deforming it away. And that's where the reflection is going to show. So when you're doing a reflection in a metallic or reflective surface, you're going to want to look at the rounded object and say, okay, here's my source of light. It's hitting this entire thing, But how is it diffracting? What direction is it going from here? That's where you put your ocular highlight or your highlight on a metallic reflective object. That's what sells it as truly reflective, because on everything else, you want your highlights directed at the source of light. But on metals and that sort of thing, you want them in the direction the light is being refracted off the object. That's the difference. That's how you have nice, great little ocular highlights, or just how you highlight a reflective surface. Took forever to get it out of my mouth, but I hope you enjoy it, or understood it. So, we're going to continue on, saying that I missed a spot on the main. That's fixed. So, from here, the hooves are going to be slightly reflective. So I'm going to do what I just said. I put refractive highlights. And because it's a cylinder, the highlight isn't going to be a circle, it's going to be a line. Cylinders are linear highlights, orbs are circular highlights. Well, here, but what about a concave shape? Well, that's just the inside of a bubble, isn't it? If you have a shape, white is not the right way to do this. I have no objects at hand to help me with this reference. Okay, this is the interior. This is a plastic container, right? It's a circular container. That's just the inside of a circle. So a concave shape is just the inside of a ball. It's the inside of a sphere. So you're going to highlight it much the same, if more concentrated. And keep in mind, refracted light is going to be kind of a... You're going to have a little bit of a line, almost more of a teardrop shape in a concave shape. That being said, I'm going to take a little bit more of the Dark Oath Flesh and mix it with a little bit of the Morghast Bone not contrast paint, like the standard paint, to get a highlight for the saddle. In all honesty, I'm pretty close to calling this guy done. I'm honestly pretty pleased with this method of paint. Before I do, though, I'm going to take some Screamer Pink and mix it with the Magenta. And hopefully my dry brush is dry by now. Yep. And this is going to be dry brushed onto the flames to help sell that it's getting cooler as we go. we're going to take a little bit of just black. Where's my black? Am I going insane? Don't answer that. Where'd my black go? Oh, it's right in front of my face. I am going crazy. Just a very small amount of black into this dry brush because I don't actually see any effect on these flames. Ooh, that was too much. Too much. Most of it off, and then we come back. Start dry brushing. We want this to, the tips of these flames to be darker than the rest, because as flames get away from the source of energy, from the source of burning, they turn in a typical flame, like a wood fire, it goes blue or white, blue, red, orange, yellow, black. But the black is more just the carbon from the smoke. So we want that to be apparent in this because we're not going to read it as a flame if that's not there. So. Slowly darker. Got a little bit of Nuln oil to darken some things up. All right. I am pretty happy with that, to be honest. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this Sterling mud, and I'm going to start applying it to the base. So we're not done yet, but we're starting to get closer. So I'm going to throw some mud on the base. This is how I typically base. I really love Sterling mud. does this need? I think I'm gonna take some of that bright pink I had made earlier, using the magenta and titanium white. I'm gonna fill in these letterings with that brighter white. Leaving some of the darker part showing. It gives it a more glowy effect, but this also frees me up to take some more of that magenta and maybe get a little bit around no. Oh, I got most of it off. You saw nothing. Alright. I honestly think I'm going to call this guy done. The only thing I'm going to do once this mud dries, which I should have thrown this on here earlier, is that I'm going to throw a wash over it. Then I'm going to use some PVA glue and some tea leaves that I cut out of the bag to create a more like maple leaf floor kind of hope. Just the detritus, the natural foliage on the ground, the dead foliage on the ground, as if it's an autumn day, and perhaps a couple patches of scrub brush, something that gives a look of autumn, some browns, some golds, and then it'll be done. But this will take about 20 minutes to dry, and I don't think I can just talk to you guys about nothing for that amount of time. So, this is a short one. I think I suggest Slapchop. It's an interesting method. I wish I had more contrast paints to try with it. But other than that, I am pretty happy with the result. Alright, I'll see you guys. Thanks for coming.